I'd like to introduce our fearless leader here at SCOE, Graciela Garcia Torres.
Thank you, Gina. So as Gina said, I am Graciela Garcia Torres. I am a curriculum specialist for English learner programs and accountability here with Sacramento County. And I'm also a Title III lead, and I have some colleagues here as well, a lot of colleagues, so thank you. So next we will hear from Davis Joint Unified School District, who they are here to share with us their promising practice that demonstrates how the California English learner principles and elements are in action and how they have worked with these over in our next city. But before we do that, we're going to show you a video from Anaheim School District where Superintendent Michael Matsuda and his staff and along with students put together a video to demonstrate what this means to students. What it means, you're going to hear from the voices of these students that speak with an accent, like me, which actually demonstrates that they have another language. And so let's hear, and this is not my laptop, so I don't want to mess it up. Thank you, Gina. So far? Okay.
So good.
I want to thank the State Board of Education for approving a transformational document called the EL Roadmap. This does three important things. First of all, it changes how we look at students from sort of deficits and stigmatizing them to assets, bringing in their rich cultural and linguistic heritage. And it also outlines a pathway to multilingualism at the schools called the Seal of Biliteracy. In our district, we have over 1,000 kids who receive that Seal of Biliteracy, showing that they're proficient in both English and a second language. We have several dozen who are triliterate, and we always have a few who are literate in 4 languages. Secondly, it provides and ensures that schools are providing a whole curriculum for all of our children, including our long-term English learners, so that they have access to a rich VAPA experience. They have access to career tech education. And most importantly, they have access to what the state calls the A through G requirements that qualifies them for UC and Cal State Success. Thirdly, it ensures that districts and sites have a system of support. Teacher and administrative leaders getting together to really looking at data and looking at gaps to close those gaps so we have more English learner success.
The English Learner Roadmap will guide teachers and schools to really value culture, language, and identity. As an English learner, I think this is important because when the school values who I am, including my language and my culture, it makes me feel valued, welcomed, and part of the school community. It makes me feel like I belong.
And with the English Learner Roadmap schools, we not only value students, but also value families and communities by building strong partnership. I know this is important because parents want to be involved and want to be part of the school community.
The English Learning Roadmap will make sure I have meaningful access to all the standards and curriculum, as well as an opportunity to develop my proficiency in English and other languages.
It's important that I have the same chance as others to take the courses I need to achieve my goals. I will be able to participate in the same positive learning experiences just like everyone else.
The California English Learner Roadmap will guide schools to look at my strengths and needs as an English learner. Schools will look at how I'm doing and will put together a plan to make sure I have the support I need. This matters because I want to be successful in school and in life. My family is counting on me to do my best, so it's important that the school has a plan to help me succeed.
The English Learner Roadmap guarantees I will have the skills I need for college and careers.
I will be able to participate in a global, diverse, multilingual 21st century world because of the English Learner Roadmap. I am grateful that California has this roadmap for schools.
So taken together, these 3 important transformations will help propel California into the 21st century.
Was that inspirational? Absolutely. So I would like to call and thank our friends from Davis Joint Unified School District who are going to come and share. I'm sorry? Oh, that's fine. Go. That are going to share. We asked them some questions. Some questions that we asked them to share with you is, How do the Davis Joint Unified School District current practices, policies, and systems align to the California EL roadmap and principles? And how were these models built in for sustainability? Because we want that ongoing. What or how are you approaching your next steps with regards to English learners? So with that said, I'm going to ask Jennifer McNeil, who's the principal of Margaret Montgomery Elementary Dual Language School, full program implementation, but she'll talk about that, and Ricardo Perez, who's the director of the English Learner Programs Immersion and World Language Department programs in Davis. Okay, so here they are.
Good morning. Actually, it's an inspiration to be here. Like Graciela said, I'm Ricardo Perez. Been an educator for many years. This is my 23rd year. I'm very proud of it. But I really like to, before we get started into our presentation and making the connections to the roadmap, I really want to pay tribute and honor to all the folks that put this work together. It's very meaningful. It's very practical. It speaks to me as a former, or actually still an English learner, right? We're always continue to be learning English. But it's, growing up in a local community here, I grew up in Woodland. My parents were migrant farmers, came to the United States, and when I started grade school, didn't speak a word of English. And so I still, to this moment, remember my kinder experience. It's like it was yesterday. And so to see what we have here in front of us, how we're putting this work together, how meaningful it is to really look at students as assets, because I can go on and on into a story about my kindergarten experience, my first years of schooling, where I knew that my teacher liked me and loved me, but I can also see the frustration in her experience trying to work with students that didn't speak the language. I often saw the rolling of the eyes and the frustration, but I knew that she cared for me, but she didn't have the skills or the skill set to teach or help me. So with that in mind, I think for me it's an inspiration to be here today, to be working in such a wonderful community that is Davis and also Woodland area and then Sacramento. I think we're very blessed and fortunate to be. So before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and let my colleague introduce herself as well. I have Jen McNeil here next to me.
Hi, good morning. My name is Jen McNeil, and I am the principal of the very best school in Davis. That's right. Go Mustangs. Thank you so much for having us here today, and we have about 20 minutes, so let's just jump right in.
Okay, let's see. So one of the things that I want to highlight is as we're looking at the roadmap, we talk about the different principles. One of the things that we have done as a team, and we have, I've been thinking of instructional services. I actually like to highlight the fact that our assistant superintendent, Roddy Buncho, is here as well. I'd like to give him a shout out because he is our fearless leader. I'm glad he could join us. And we do have, he's one of the many, we have community members that support us wholeheartedly, board members, superintendent, et cetera. But, in our journey to really affect change in Davis and really bring about important change for our students that are struggling the most, the students that are furthest from opportunity, I think one of the highlights for us, or the important thing, and it's the foundation and the pillar, was to really establish what we call the Davis Joint Unified School District Coherence Map. And with that map, we've been able to establish our purpose, agreements, and then one of the foundations is the commitment to equity. And I think that's what the principles also speak to, and the roadmap does. It is a foundation for equity. And one of the things that we've actually have undergone is that as this leadership team has come together, we've actually made a commitment to make sure that we not only receive equity training, we went through the National Equity Project, but also, it's great, but also we actually have made agreements that whenever we see injustice, whenever we see situations that are unfair, that we're going to call it out. It needs to be called out. That's another thing that this roadmap does as well. It lays a positive foundation, but it also says we are responsible to make sure that when we see things that are happening to our children who are most impacted, and sometimes in a positive way, which is great, but if it's in a negative way, we're going to call it out. Furthermore, we've actually established capacity and coherence in instructional services, and then also, so that's the team, the instructional services has really gone through this process. But also that has been very clearly laid out to the principals of the schools and also the staff, so that they understand the coherence and what our vision and mission is. Also, it's part of what board members also understand, and we're all working together so that we all speak the same language, the language of equity, the language of moving forward and making sure we serve the needs of all students. And that's what I want to highlight. We're not focusing on one group, we're focusing on all students, and particularly students that have been historically underserved. And then also making sure that our community understands this as well. Our community needs to be aware. It's something that they make sure that they're part of and that they have some say and voice and choice as well. And then one of the things that's important to us is that we have made a strong commitment to, as we address concerns or issues, that we find fundamental solutions versus just attacking the symptoms and not really addressing the real issue, which I think a lot of us sometimes without really unintentionally, we do that. So what we've actually committed is like, let's call it out. Is it a systemic issue? What is it? Is it a historical practice that some people may not want to change, but we know it needs to be changed? How do we tackle that? And we have to have the courage and have the courageous conversations. And it may be uncomfortable. It will be uncomfortable, I tell you, but it is important. It needs to happen. And then finally, I think one of the most important things is that leadership, we've actually made a commitment to student achievement, to serve all students and really look the students that have been historically underserved. With this in mind, I wanted to show you our graphic that we've made public, and we're going to continue to make public at board meetings. We're trying to get this out to also parents so that they can understand, but also staff understands this clearly. And that is our vision. And I'd like to highlight Sanger for giving us the inspiration on this, because I think it's important to that we share resources and that we actually give credit where we find, because one of the things that we need to be doing, continue to do, is learn from each other, learn from one another. I think that's the practical piece of today, is how we learn from one another, how we borrow. We can call it harvesting, right? Take some ideas from other people. But the idea of establishing coherence, want to give credit to them. But the actual pieces that you're going to see here, those are exclusively part of our community. These are definitely come from our staff, from our, the whole community engaging in this, and specifically we as instructional services, directors and site principals, teachers, wanting to make sure that we bring this idea to life. And that is our mission: ignite the love for learning and equip each student with the knowledge and skills, character, and well-being to thrive in a 21st century environment. And that's what we're looking at here with the roadmap as well. We want to make sure that the goals are 21st century teaching and learning, so we need to make sure that the professional development that we get to our teachers, the learning that our students are getting is 21st century. We're looking for in the future. And then ultimately, we want to make sure that we are closing the achievement gap. And we also acknowledge that it's not just the achievement gap, it is also an opportunity gap. And that's one thing that we need to make sure that when we're looking at our underserved students, what has been that opportunity that they've been afforded? That's something that we cannot ignore, because a lot of times we want to be careful not to put the blame on students and say, well, they're not achieving because it's the student or it's the family. No, what has been their opportunity? You look at my opportunity and you can see that my parents had very limited resources. But the reason why I was able to succeed is because I had teachers that were able to support me, and that inspired me. And I'll go into some detail in a little bit later, but I had teachers that, as I was learning English, that were introducing me to protest literature. That was one of my English classes. I was barely learning English, and she was a Berkeley graduate, and bless her, she was already introducing myself and other students, and it was not in a different setting where we were pulled out away from the core. We were incorporated, we were integrated, and we were being exposed to high-level thinking, high-level questioning, and literature that was very meaningful, very practical, and inspirational. So those things have motivated me. I remember, I'll give you a little anecdote real quick. I was in this class that I'm talking about, and I remember a student using the word "in retrospect." I was an English learner. I had no idea what "in retrospect" meant. But my teacher made sure to say, can you just repeat what you just said and how you use that word "in retrospect"? I've never forgotten it again. Those are the experiences that we need to have our students in. They need to be in high-rich language environments. And I can go on. But the other piece is the strategies as far as our vision here. We want to make sure we establish professional learning communities. And then for these communities to really come alive, we really have to make sure that we establish systems where we can collect data that is meaningful not only to the students, but also to the staff, right? A lot of times we'll say, let's bring a collaborative team together, let's have teachers collaborate. But if we don't have meaningful data to bring them around and ask themselves questions and reflect, not in a gotcha way, it's more like how can we continue to grow ourselves as teachers, but also students. So that's one of the areas we want to make sure we continue to build. And then, of course, effective instruction. I just gave you just one simple explanation or example of an effective strategy a teacher used a long time ago. And then also making sure that the social and emotional needs of our students are met. You see some of the principals talk about looking at students as assets, making sure that they're in a safe environment. When we challenge them and when we give them when we meet that challenge with the appropriate supports, these students will feel that they're connected socially and emotionally. And one of the things that I, as a teacher, many times would hear from other folks and colleagues was, a lot of our students, and particularly English learners, they're not motivated. They don't want to be part of this. They're not showing that they're interested. Well, if I reflect on sometimes the experiences that they undergo and the circumstances where they're getting pulled from the core, it's not going to be very motivating. And one of the values that I see is that we're moving away from the principle of let's have them learn the sequential model. Let's have them learn English first, and then we expose them to the higher level thinking. That's not the correct way. I'll give you an example of how I was challenged as an English learner, and I will continue to be challenged, but it's great. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up. We're very fortunate to have Principal Jen McNeil be a leader of one of our schools that serves a great portion of our English learners, and she's going to walk us through a process and a story. And we're still in this journey together. And like I said, this is the importance. This is where the importance of the coherence map and coherence comes together, because at Instructional Services, we are on a daily basis looking, okay, how can we bring more supports? How can we bring more resources to it? The areas where we're being challenged. And this is a perfect example of how we as a group have coordinated with the community, with the board, with all the directors at the district level, teachers and staff, the parents. They were part of this changing policy or changing that's been inspired by many things that are going on locally right now with California Edge, the roadmap, and also looking forward to other policies.
Oh, it's so nice to be here, even though it's July 31st and I'm technically not supposed to be working, because I feel like I'm with my people, right? Like that between that video and listening, every time I get to listen to Ricardo and Dr. Olson, I get reminded of why I'm here and why I'm doing this work. So thank you so much for being here. How many of you in the room are actually at a site still, or similar to me? Yeah, be proud. It's okay. So this story is hopefully going to be for all of you, and it's just an opportunity to bring you in and see what we've been doing at our little school over in South Davis, and how the different choices that we have made align with and support or are supported by the EL roadmap. A little bit just briefly about me. I believe that education is a social justice issue, which means that providing English learners with the schools and the learning that they need, not only just to do well, but to thrive, is a social justice and an equity issue. And so this story today about the little school, Montgomery, is really a story about equity and about how we can make choices using the roadmap and many other different types of policies that bring us closer to having a more just and fair society. So Montgomery is a TK6, now kindergarten, but we'll get there, 6 elementary school. We've got about 500 students, many different adults on campus. For the size of school that we've got about 40% of our students are English learners, and 55% of our students are fall under the category of socioeconomically disadvantaged. We are also a 2-way bilingual immersion school, dual immersion. How many of you out there are either have dual immersion, growing dual immersion, or thinking about yeah, all over I'm running into people. So hopefully this will be helpful for you too about the changes that we've made. And we also have English-only programs. So we're unique in that sense that we had a track of two-way bilingual classes going up the grade levels and one classroom of English-only. Another thing that's very special about Montgomery that I'm fortunate to be picking up those that came before us is that we are a part of, we're a SEAL school. We're part of the Sobrato Early Academic Language model. We've been doing that for 2 years. We're entering our 3rd year this next year. It's also going to be my 3rd year as principal at Montgomery. So thanks to Sally, who came before me, that she connected us with the Sobrato family. Because what has happened in the classrooms because of that connection is absolutely incredible. I also just want to say, too, that I actually have 3 bosses here right now because, board member and 2. So I know you feel for me. Right? Okay, so what happened at Montgomery? I only came back to be a principal at Montgomery. I left the district because of how special this school is. So when I say that it's special, I know everyone says that, but really, truly, within the context of Davis and what you may or may not think about Davis and what, who is there, it's a very special place to be. The community is incredibly inclusive. I don't know if you saw on the slide before. We have a banner up in front of our school, came around, oddly enough, sometime around inauguration, that said, we all belong here, todos pertenecemos a Montgomery. So I knew that I was coming into a very special place. I also knew, though, that the changes that had occurred over time in the school from going from all English only to Spanish immersion to now a 2-way bilingual immersion, which, by the way, in dual immersion world means that 50% of our students are native Spanish speakers and 50% of our students ideally are native English speakers. They start in kindergarten 90% of the time in Spanish, and that continues all the way up until 4th grade, where we transition eventually into 50% instruction in English and 50% instruction in Spanish. And that goes all the way then through 6th grade. But I had heard that, and you could see, anyone can go on and look at the dashboard and the different other indicators that we judge and assess schools by, that Montgomery wasn't doing as well in that way that we would like to do. But I was really curious to see sort of what that was really all about and where it was coming from. And after the first year, it became pretty clear because the staff talked with me about it and previous leaders that there was a disproportionality between the 2 programs. So between the 2-way bilingual dual immersion and between English, the outcomes for students were different. So the first thing that we set about doing after I spent a year just really continuing to establish relationship, which even though I've been in the district for 14 years, I still needed to work, of course, on establishing relationship, was to take a look at what exactly is going on and what is the data that we see. So I want to share some of that with you briefly. So the first one is information about our English language arts. And you can see across in our English-only classrooms, this is painful, right? 0% of the students met standards or above in ELA. TWBI 1 and 2 are the 2 different sections, and then you can see the district average. So those were hard things to take a look at and hard things for us to put together and to compile, but we did it anyway. I also want you, though, to take a look actually at the column that isn't in red, the black columns, because that's where we started to see the story, not just of like Montgomery not doing well and Montgomery having poor performance on test scores, but the story of where within the school we were doing well. And when you broke it down, it turns out that, by the way, within the district, English learners at Montgomery were doing better than English learners in the rest of the district. I have that on my wall, no. And also, students who were in poverty, whose families were in poverty, they were doing better at Montgomery. So what is it that we're doing in our dual immersion classrooms that is helping students be successful? Just so you can see and get an idea of the disproportionality, 80% of the kids in the 4th grade English only class in poverty, over on the right-hand side is the percentage of students with IEPs in a classroom. Very disproportionate. One of my 6th grade classes had 38% of the kids in this class, you can't read the names, but have an IEP. So this is actually a seating chart of an evaluation that I did for a classroom. And I went through and highlighted and outlined which students had different things going on for them in terms of their learning needs. So you've got kids, with IEPs. Anyone in yellow is an English learner. So that was another myth that we had at our school, that English learners were probably most likely in our immersion program when they weren't. They're across the school. And so we could look specifically at that data about how English learners were doing in English only and how they're doing in dual immersion. And we all by now know the research that tells us that students do just as well, if not better, than their peers in dual immersion than they do in English only. Well, our data just was proving that point, right? That our students, and particularly our English learners, were doing better in dual immersion. So now what we're gonna do with that is really the big question. So once we got the data all together, the next thing that we did was something called a root cause analysis, because it's really easy, as Ricardo was saying, to say that the problems that are happening are because, you know, the students are living in poverty, or the problems that are happening is because there's 3 languages in the room. But really, you have to dig deeper than that, and you have to stop with the excuses and look very hard at what the root cause of those problems are. And so we engaged both staff, parents, district level in a root cause analysis that allowed us to identify the main issues or problems that we thought why the outcomes were different for students in our English only program. And not only did we identify that root cause, but we also said, what's the one of all of these causes? What is the single factor that if we change this one thing, we're gonna see a big difference? And so for us, after we engaged in that process, the thing that we learned about this was really that we had a systemic issue, that it's not about the child in the room or how many languages they know or don't know, right? Or where they go home to at night, that it was about the systems we had set up in order to provide education to students. And so if we wanted to make a difference in the outcomes, we needed to change the systems. It's that same old story about a plant that's not growing, right? You don't say to the plant, grow better, learn, you know, be stronger. You change the soil, you add more water, you move it to a different window to give it more light. Same thing for our kids. And having the root cause analysis really allowed us to take some of that emotionality out of it also. We did this with our parents, with our staff, like I said. And really for the parents, I think that was really empowering to have them be able to look at it not just from their point of view of their own child, but to look at it from the point of view of other children. And then finally, we also looked at what are the policies and research that's out there that can tell us what the best practices are? And well, this was like the perfect time this last year to be doing this with our community, because we had, as we all know, right, we've had Prop 58, we have the EL roadmap, our district policies were aligning about equity and coherence. And so it really came together at one time to be the right time to do this, and also SEAL. So, very, very briefly, because we can never cover all of SEAL in one moment. SEAL really is about joyful, rich, and rigorous learning with meaning. And probably the with meaning and in context is the very most important part. So when you walk into our SEAL classrooms, they're alive and they're happy places to learn. So, you know, like I said, what we learned is that we had a systemic disproportionality based on our program structure, and that therefore we had unequal learning outcomes. And that really where our strength was in dual immersion. So we took this discussion not only to our community but also to our board and asked them to consider an approval or our recommendation, to approve our recommendation to transition to an entirely dual immersion program. The other things that we learned through this process is that in our community we value dual immersion, and that equity and inclusiveness were also stakeholder values. So, like I said, just briefly, it was right. It was the right time and prime for us to make this change. We had district and board support, we had parent and community support, and we also had staff buy-in. I even had teachers teaching in English only who went to board meetings and said, this is the direction our school needs to go. So that took a lot of relationship building to get to that place, but we did it. So where we're at right now and just moving forward, this is obviously just, it feels like the preface or the table of contents. Like we're in the very beginning of our story, right? We're certainly not finished. We're in a constant cycle of improvement. But for us, the next step, now that we've made this decision, is to really take a look at what we're doing with kids when we're in the room. And now that we've got the success with SEAL, how can we grow that, bring it up to other grades, and make sure that our program is still really high quality? So we're going to be partnering with SEAL to do some of that program evaluation, which is really, I think, principle number 4 is the next part of the phase we're at. I think, finally, the only thing I just want to say is that this is hard work. We all know that, but we're here anyway. So find your allies, find your trust systems and your support systems, and go forward anyway, and do it, because it's worth it. So I think that's it.
And for inspiration and just to continue the synergy that we're feeling here today, because I know I feel it, and I'm very thankful of it. I'd like to leave you with this quote, one of my favorites. I, for one, believe that if you give people a thorough understanding of what confronts them and the basic causes that produce it, they'll create their own program. And when the people create a program, you get action. And that's what we want to see. We want to make sure that in this case, we involve the families. One of the things that an aha moment for us is really convincing our Hispanic, Latino families the importance of biliteracy or bilingual education. Because if you think about it, coming back from the era of 227, where we were discouraging bilingual programs and talking about overwhelmingly in English for kids to learn, a lot of our families are still convinced that English only is the way to go. So we actually have work to do still in that area of making sure that families understand that kids benefit, particularly students that are learning a second language by the model of dual immersion or two-way bilingual immersion. And I'm proud to say that I've been part of 2 communities now, a community of Woodland, where we've had a long-standing program that survived the era of 227, but also I'm very proud to be of my new family, Davis, had a program, long-standing program there, Cesar Chavez, which is a Spanish immersion program that serves the community. So I'm proud to say that we're part of that community and part of that group. But I'm also proud to say that even as I'm speaking here, I've constantly been getting emails from different districts and in the surrounding area that want to visit model programs. They want to visit Cesar Chavez. They want to visit Montgomery Elementary. And so I'm very proud to say that we need to continue to collaborate, work together, inspire one another, and very grateful to have policies such as the EL roadmap that continue to guide us and move us forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Ricardo. Ricardo and Jen are here through the day, so if you have questions for them, they'll be here during lunch. At this point, before we transition, we'd like to give you just 1 minute or so to just share what's your highlight, what's in your mind, before we go to our next speaker. Okay? And you have page number 7 in your guidebook to just jot down some notes there.